Hello, I'm Holly and I haven't done a wrap up in 2 months. So you might know that February wasn't a great month for me. I was a bit stressed and I just didn't really have the motivation to film anything. I did film a couple of videos, but I didn't end up getting around to filming my January wrap up. Now, January and February were actually really good reading months for me. I read a lot. And that means that this wrap up is probably going to be quite long. And January and February was also the first time where I was like really DNFing books. I have DNF'd books before. If you don't know what that is, that means you did not finish. Either you're putting it down, you're never going to pick it up again, or maybe you're just putting it down for now. And I have DNF'd in the past, but there was something in me in January and February, maybe because I was so stressed about other elements in my life. I was like, if I don't like this book when I first start it, what is the point? Why would I waste my time really reading books that I know I'm not going to enjoy when I could be reading books that I know that I will, or that will surprise me? And that meant that I DNF'd a few books, which I will briefly cover in the wrap up. So let's first start with the stats. So during January and February, I read 18 books. That doesn't include my DNFs, I don't count them. I only count the books that I have completely finished. That worked out at 6,788 pages, or an average of 115 pages a day. In star rating, I had 2 2 stars, 5 3 stars, 8 4 stars, and 3 5 stars, which worked out at an average of 3.6. That's okay, that's a bit of an average rating, but I did obviously read a lot of 4 stars, I had a couple of 5 stars. In genre, I read a lot of genres, so I'm just gonna read it from my notebook. I read 3 fantasies, 3 horrors, 1 sci-fi, 2 contemporaries, 1 historical fiction, 1 paranormal, 1 poetry, 1 mystery, 3 romances, and 2 classics. In format, I read 10 physical books, 3 audiobooks, and 5 ebooks. In demographic, I read 3 middle grades, 3 young adult, and 12 adult books. And then in source, 8 of the books that I read were from my owned TBR, which predated 2021. 1 was hauled, 4 were from Scribd, 2 were borrowed, and then 3 were from Netgalley or the publisher directly. So as you can see, I also joined Netgalley at the beginning of this year, and if you don't know what Netgalley is, it's like an online website for people in the bookish world, so like bloggers, YouTubers, you've got librarians, you've got booksellers, anyone in the world of books, and you can request advanced copies of books. These are usually ebook copies, and you read them, give them a review like before the release date to try and like build up hype of books. And I joined, I'd seen that a lot of people had been using it, and I thought I don't have like enough subscribers. I thought maybe you needed like 1,000 or something, but I thought I'd request a couple of books. So what you do is you like request them, and then the publisher will say yes or no. And I actually got approved for quite a few arcs. I have a lot of arcs I need to get to over the next few months, and then I did also get to a few arcs as well at the beginning of the year. And then I also applied for an arc directly with a publisher, but we will get onto that in a while. So without further ado, settle down, get a hot drink or a cold drink, whatever you want, and let's talk about all the books that I read over the past 2 months. The first 2 books I'm going to talk about together, I did read these like I think 1 in January and then 1 in February or the end of January, so there was a gap between them, but they're both in the same series, so I thought that I would talk about them together. And they are, let's get them in order, you have The Mad Ship and then Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. These are the second and third books in the Lifeship Traders trilogy, which is an epic fantasy series set in this place where there are live ships, which are these ships that come to life. The figurehead comes to life after 3 generations of a family have died on its decks. And you're primarily following the Vestrit family, who are a trading family. They own one of these live ships, and at the beginning of the first book, the patriarch of the family ends up dying. The live ship quickens, it comes to life, and one of the daughters of this family, she has been on the ship for a while with her father, and she expects to inherit the ship, but things don't necessarily go the way that she expected, and there's a lot of other things going on. There's also a pirate who is trying to be like the king of the pirates. There is another one of the Vestrits, Wintro, who is a priest and then he's forced onto the ship. There's dragons, there's lots and lots of things in this series, so I won't tell you too much more so I don't spoil it, but I loved these two books. I gave them both 5 stars, and Ship of Destiny might be like my favourite book ever. That's quite a claim. I'm just gonna say that this series is definitely up there with like my favourite series of all time, and I don't know if I love this series more than the other one which I've read, which is the Farseer trilogy. That was like the first trilogy in this world. This is the second one, but I just loved this series so much. I think the main reason that I absolutely adored this series are the characters. So the Farseer trilogy, which is the other trilogy I've read, just follows Fitz. It is, I think it's in his perspective, first person, and I love Fitz. I love some of the other characters in that series as well, but this one is like multi-perspective. I think it's third person, but you're following a multitude of characters, and I just loved these characters. Even the ones that were like truly evil, they were just so well created, and they had so many layers and dimensions to their character, so you kind of loved to hate them, or you sympathised a bit with the things that they've gone through, but then you're also like, you shouldn't continue to do these awful things. And my favourite character of all time is in this series, and it is Paragon. I'm not even going to tell you who Paragon is. If you've read the series, you will know, but he is my favourite character of all time. And there were some moments in this book especially involving that character that really hurt me. I was like kind of talking with my mum throughout the entirety of my reading experience through this book. She hasn't read these books. She's more like a sounding board. Does anyone else have that person in your life who you're just like telling about books and they don't really care, but you need to get these like feelings out? And my emotions were up and down. It was a roller coaster. I was just going through it in this book. I also love the magic. It was very cleverly woven in, and I love it. I love this series so much. If you love fantasy and you haven't read Robin Hobb, you need to read this series. Well, you need to read the Farseer trilogy first. I'd recommend starting with that, but to get to this, and I'm so excited to continue in this world. The next book I read was Rise of the Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste. This is the second book in the Jumbies trilogy. Is it a trilogy series? And this is a middle grade series set on a Caribbean island, and it follows this little girl called Corinne who has been taught about the Jumbies, which are these like, is it like folklore spirits? They're evil spirits or creatures, and it ends up that the Jumbies are real and she has to fight them. So it's like a group of kids trying to defeat the monsters. I enjoyed it. I really love the setting. I absolutely love the setting in this second one because it was very sea focused. There's like mermaids, and I also really like our set of characters. There's a really great friendship group in this, but I don't know, there's something about this series that I just don't like love. I don't really click with it. And I think that there's a lot of times when the kids are doing these incredibly dangerous things, or they basically go like on a sea adventure, and all I can think about is the parents at home being so scared, like their kids have just gone missing. And I think as an adult, I can't separate myself from like, if they were my kids, I would be like so stressed. I don't think I'm going to be continuing in it just because there's like so many other books and series that I want to read more than that, but I'd still recommend it. It was good. The next book was another children's book, and that was Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. This is the Mina Lima edition, so it is illustrated, and there are also these interactive elements. So for example here, you can like pull out Alice's legs, pull out her arms, and I would definitely recommend this edition if you are wanting to pick up Alice in Wonderland because it was so fun. I loved the art style. It was like, I think it matched the story really well, but obviously these are two books, the first and second book. in the Alice in Wonderland series. I read both of them in one go, and this follows this little girl called Alice who falls down a rabbit hole into Wonderland, which is this very nonsensical world. I'm sure most people are familiar with the story, and there's not really much to say about this except that it is wild. And you might think like, oh, I've read about nonsensical worlds before. You haven't read about Wonderland. There is no logic, like zero, no plot, not really a plot. But I did enjoy it. I think I gave it 4 stars. And I did like the characters. Obviously you have your typical, you have Alice, you have the White Rabbit, the Mad Hatter, the Cheshire Cat. So the characters in this are really good. And I think because it's such a familiar story, it was like very nostalgic to read, even though I haven't read this one before. But yeah, go into it knowing that there is just no sense at all. And I don't think it's going to be for everyone, but I did have a great time reading this. The next one we have is The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth. This is a young adult contemporary coming of age story. Well, it's not contemporary. It's not contemporary. I picked this as my contemporary prompt, but this is actually a historical fiction, but it's very like recent history. I think it's like the late 80s and the 90s. But you know what, let's move on from the fact that it didn't hit my prompt for my TBR game. But this follows this girl called Cameron Post who is coming to terms with her sexuality, and she is gay, but she's like keeping this to herself. There are some like romance plot lines, but it's not really a romance. And I think this book is very well known for talking about conversion therapy. So Cameron ends up getting sent to this conversion school camp thing, but that is only in like the last section of the book. So it's more just about this character growing up. She starts as a very young girl at the beginning of this book, and it's her growing up, exploring her sexuality, exploring life. I ended up giving this one 3 stars, and I think it was just like the writing for me felt a little bit overwritten. I think some of the sentences just seemed to go on a little bit long, and because of that it just felt very slow to me. I don't think this is designed to be a fast-paced read, but it felt a little bit clunky and maybe overly long because not much is happening in this book, and it does have an open ending, which I wasn't a huge fan of. I think sometimes that really works to me when the ending doesn't really give you all the answers or tell you everything that's happened, but because it's like quite a chunky book, yeah, it's like 450 pages, which I would say is quite chunky for a book like this, that you had all this build up and then it kind of didn't go anywhere. And I can't really remember too much. I read this like beginning of January, and I don't know if it's really going to stick with me. I think it is an interesting book if you are looking to get into more like gay fiction. I mean, it was good. I just didn't like really love it. So 3 stars. It was a bit of an average read for me. Okay, then we get into my first arc, which was The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. I was incredibly excited for this book because of the blurb, and I do think the blurb is like a tiny bit spoilery, so if you really don't want to know anything about this book, I would maybe like skip ahead a tiny bit, but this is like what got me to read the book, so even though it's spoilery, like it was the reason I picked it up, so I'm going to tell you. So this follows this woman who has a clone of herself who is having an affair with her husband, then her clone kills her husband and they end up having to cover it up. And this book had so much potential, and I've definitely wanted to read books from this author before. I've seen their books around quite a lot over the past few years, and I heard the plot of this and I was like, yes, I'm going to try this author. This is going to be like a new favourite book. I really thought I was going to love this. And for most of the book, I would say it was a 4-star read. It was very intriguing, very fast-paced. It's not actually a very long book, and I was like really interested about what was going on. I will say that our main character is completely unlikable. I detested her. She had not one like good feature about her. I know that not everyone needs to have like likable characters, but it kind of like led into the last bit, which I hated the ending of this book. and it brought it down to a 2 stars, which was really disappointing because I had such high expectations and I was really loving the first half of this book. I'm not going to go too much into what happened at the end of this book, but again, I will point you towards my trigger warnings because there is a whole section at the end of this book that I felt had no logic. I think it was incredibly triggering and like utterly disgusting, like it disgusted me. And I think the reason that made it like worse is that I felt it was completely unnecessary. The logic at the end thrown out the window. Our main character is meant to be this incredible scientist. She's meant to be super intelligent and she is very like cold. She does have a very cold personality. She's not very empathetic with other people, and I think the writing style matched that really well, and it kind of worked for me for most of the book, but this last scene, it just didn't make sense to me and I was shaking with anger at the end of this book. I think my experience was also worsened by, say, like my personal beliefs on children. I think if you have children or you want to have children, or I don't know, you just like children, I don't know if you'll like the ending of this book. And yeah, 2 stars at the end. It really completely ruined the book for me, the ending. The next book I read was also an advanced copy, so again, thank you to Netgalley and the publisher for giving me this, and that was Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death. Now, I'd never heard of this book, I'd never heard of this author, and this is quite a hard book to read. I was not in the best place mentally, and it probably wasn't a good idea to read this book because this is basically following this individual who meets death and is writing death's memoir? Biography? I don't know. It's talking about death's life. It's looking at death and people who have died. I don't really know how to explain this. It's very, very poetic. There is a mix of prose and poetry in this, which I really loved. And I did actually give this one 5 stars. It was brutal. It ripped me to shreds, but in a good way. I don't know. I really don't know if I would recommend it to someone who's really struggling because I did feel that it was very hopeful. I don't know, it went straight to my core and it was a really hard book to read, but I would also highly, highly recommend this one. I definitely want to pick up some more books by this author. I think that they are more a poet, and I loved the poetry in this book. This book just really hit me hard. It was a very raw exploration of mental health. It brought attention to some events that I didn't know much about. For example, it talks about Sarah Reed and Inga Maria Hauser. They were 2 of the stories that I'd never heard about before, and it's real life accounts of death. It's talking about war, it's talking about suicide, it's talking about everything that you could imagine that a book about death is going to talk about. Obviously this is a fictionalized story, but it did feel very, very real. And again, I will just give major warnings. If you aren't in the best place, I feel like this book could make you more depressed or hurt you, but it also did have that hopeful message about just keep going. And yeah, I really loved that book and I would definitely recommend it. The next book I read was another arc. I basically got tons of arcs in one go, and this one was directly from the publisher. I got an e-arc and then I pre-ordered the book, or I think I pre-ordered the book because I thought I wasn't getting the arc, but then I got the arc. But that is a Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Ooh, it's very reflective. This is a polygamous retelling of Dracula's Brides, and I really, really enjoyed this one. So you're following, I think it's Constanta, who is found by Dracula after her village has been attacked, and he turns her into a vampire. She becomes his first bride, and then there are also 2 other people who come into this relationship, another woman and another man. So you have 2 men, 2 women. It's very It's very sexy. I don't know if I would call it a romance because it's a lot about Constanta and her fellow brides kind of rising up against Dracula. He is this very controlling and cruel character, as you would expect from a Dracula character. And it's just, I don't know, I love vampires, I love vampiric fiction. And if you're looking for a poetic and melodramatic take on the Dracula story, I think that you will really, really enjoy this one. It's very short, and I think that was like my major issue, that I kind of wanted more. I think it was incredibly fast-paced. You're covering hundreds and hundreds of years in this short novel, but you know, I still loved it, and I would definitely recommend it for fans of vampires. Then I read Alatsoe by Darcy Littlebadger. This follows a Lipan Apache teen in this world where supernatural things are just like accepted. So she has a ghost dog, there are vampires and other supernatural creatures, and at the beginning of this book she has this, I think it's a dream, and her cousin has come to her and said, I've been killed, and she ends up trying to figure out how her cousin died, who killed her cousin, getting kind of revenge for this. And I did really enjoy this one. This was also a 3-star read for me, and I read this during Polathon, which is a readathon hosted by Jade at JD Ray Reads. I did a whole vlog for that, so I will link that if you want some more of my thoughts. I love the world and I love the magic system, and I definitely think this is a book that could expand and become a series because that world was so unique. You could even follow different characters in this world. I just loved how these supernatural elements were just like part of life. And I feel like a lot of, say, paranormal, like young adult paranormal, it's a lot about the characters finding that this world exists. But no, it's just like, oh yeah, my friend's dating a vampire, and it's like, okay. I think similarly to A Dowry of Blood though, I did have a couple of issues with the pacing. I felt like it was very fast, and obviously as kind of a mystery, our main character Alatsoe is trying to figure out these things, and I felt like the conclusions she came to them like, I don't really understand how she came to them, or she'd have like one guess and it would be correct. And I think I prefer when maybe there are some red herrings, or I just didn't really understand her thought process. Clearly the author knew what had happened, but maybe I'm just not very experienced with mysteries, because she came to all these conclusions and I was like, where did you get that information? Like, when did you figure that out? And I think I would have liked maybe a bit more of Alatsoe's like thought process, like how she like came to a decision. But it was still a good book. I think if you do love young adult paranormal, you should definitely pick this one up because it was fun. And if there were other books brought out in this like world, I would definitely pick them up. Then we come to my first DNF, which was The Winter Spirits by E.C. Hibbs. This is set in some north place, the Northlands, and the Northern Lights accidentally gets dragged out of the sky by this mage, and then they go on this journey. I didn't really get very far in this book, and the reason that I put it down is I just wasn't interested at all. I also felt like there was no logic. Some of the things that happened were a bit convenient, and I just wasn't enjoying it, so I just like put it down. I think it was about 100 pages in. Then I read The House with Chicken Legs by Sophie Anderson. This was a 4-star read for me. I really enjoyed this. So this is a middle grade following this girl whose grandmother is Baba Yaga, which is this, I think it's a person from Russian folklore who helps the dead cross over, and because of this they live in this house with chicken legs, which is always getting up and moving, and our main character really doesn't like this. Every time she starts to make friends or she starts to like, I don't know, settle down, the house just gets up, moves on, and she just wants a normal life. But throughout the course of this novel, she's really like fully understanding what it means to be a Baba Yaga and the importance of that job. And I really did enjoy this. I love the folklore elements. I definitely need to read some more books with folklore. I loved our characters. I loved the house with chicken legs. And it was just a very fun, but also a very like hard-hitting read. There were a lot of discussions of grief, as you can imagine, in a book about people dying. And I think that it covered those topics really well, especially for a younger audience. Then I read Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankin. This is a collection of lyrical essays about what it means to be black in America, and I did enjoy this one as well. I gave this one 4 stars. I listened to this one on audiobook and I would definitely recommend it. It's quite a short audiobook, and one of my favourite essays in this was about Serena Williams, and it was looking a lot at how racism does permeate the everyday, that it isn't necessarily people like using slurs or stuff. Obviously that is also bad, but it's about these like small acts of aggression, these small acts of racism, and how over time they build up and the emotional impact that that has on black people. And I would definitely recommend this one. As I said, it's very short, it's only a few hours, so it's on Scribd in the UK. I don't know if it's on Scribd in other countries or where else you can get it, but I would definitely recommend checking this one out. Then we had a book that really surprised me, and that was The Vagabond Clown by Edward Marston. This is a historical mystery following this Elizabethan theatre troupe, and it is a series. This is actually the 13th book in this series. I haven't read any of the other books, and I thought I was going to be utterly confused, but actually it explained things really well, so I'd say that you could go into this series at any point and you'd probably understand. But each of these books I think follows kind of a murder mystery and the theatre troupe having to like solve it, and it was really fun. I wasn't expecting great things from this book, and it did only get a 3-star from me, but I had so much fun that I'm definitely going to be reading more books in this series. I loved the way that language was used in this. I don't know if I'll be able to find like my favourite quote. So it's like 2 of them were arguing and one of them says, "Not before I step my toe against your vile buttocks." I'm like, I'm a child, okay? I'm a child. It was just so good. And there was another bit and it was like, "They offend," what was it? "Keep your suggestions to yourself, they offend my ear." I just think it was hilarious. And maybe it's just like a British thing. I don't know if other countries would enjoy this, but I'm definitely going to be reading some more in this series. I'll probably go back to the beginning, start at number 1, but I just love the Elizabethan theatre troupe. I didn't know that was something I needed in my life until I read this book, and now I just want to read every book about an Elizabethan theatre troupe that there is. I don't think there's that many. If you have any recommendations, that's a very specific subgenre, like Elizabethan theatre. That is what I want. I loved it. And yeah, I only gave it 3 stars. Obviously it's not the greatest work of fiction ever written, but I had a great time and I definitely recommend this one if you like that kind of cozy mystery feel. Then I filmed a romance reading vlog. I will also link that in the description if you want to check it out and learn more about like my full thoughts. I'm not going to go too in detail because I have talked about these books a lot, but the first one I read was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. And this follows this girl called Chloe Brown who has chronic pain, and she ends up having this near-death experience. She is almost hit by a car, and because of this she kind of makes this bucket list of things that she really wants to achieve. She feels like she hasn't achieved anything, and she wants to like put herself out there, go on a drunken night out, ride a motorcycle, go camping, all that kind of thing that she's never done before. And she ends up having this like kind of hate to love romance with the superintendent of her building, Red. And something that I really loved about this book was the banter. This was also an exceptionally funny book. I loved all the interactions between Chloe and Red. I love the interactions between Chloe and her sisters. The romance in this was also exceptional. It was very steamy. If you don't like explicit scenes, this might not be for you, but I had a fantastic time reading this book and I would definitely recommend this one. The next one I read was The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. This is a historical romance following these 2 women. The first one is Lucy. Her past lover has just got married to a man and she's very upset, and her father has recently died. He was this famous scientist. And then the other perspective in this book is this countess. Her husband died a few years ago and she has this scientific manuscript that she wants to translate. It's like this masterwork, and Lucy ends up going to the countess's house to do this. And a romance ensues. I absolutely love this one as well. I gave this one 4 stars as well, and I just loved it. The romance was great. This one was maybe a little bit less steamy than Chloe Brown, but there were definitely some explicit sex scenes in this one as well. And I just really loved the plot. I loved this whole story about science, and I think it was the Victorian period. And I just really love that kind of plot, and I think it's definitely a storyline that I want to read more about. But yeah, I also really enjoyed this one. And then we came to the Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. I didn't love this one as much. I gave this one 2 stars, and I went a lot more in detail in my reading vlog if you want to know like why I didn't like this book. But my main issues were, first of all, I didn't like the male love interest. He just like really wasn't my type at all. And I know that that is like a very popular kind of male character in romance, very like not aggressive, a bit possessive, a bit like alpha male, and that's just like not my type. But the main reason I didn't like this book was how it made me feel about myself. So the main character in this, Stella, has Asperger's, and I also have Asperger's, and Stella really struggles, I think, with her identity, and I felt like there were a lot of moments in this where she really hated herself, and I know that that was kind of the point, trying to show by the end of the book she realises that she doesn't have to change, that she isn't broken, that she is worthy of love. And I think that that was an important discussion to have, but I went into this expecting to have this like really fun time, and because Stella really is struggling for so much of this book, and I was also going through a very hard time, it just like hit too close to home, and some of the points in this just made me feel really bad about myself, and kind of brought up all these feelings that I think about myself that I know are negative, that I know I have to challenge, but you know, just seeing it on paper, it's really painful. But yeah, I think this book will work for some people. I think if you maybe do have autism, go into it just knowing that that kind of content is in this. It's not too much, but obviously it did affect me personally and like really upset me, so we're just gonna move on from this one. Then the next one I read was a young adult contemporary, which was You Should See Him in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This follows this girl, what was her name? Liz, and she is quite poor, so she isn't going to be able to go to university unless she gets a scholarship, and funnily enough her school have this like competition kind of where if you become the prom king or queen they will give you a scholarship. So even though she doesn't really care about prom or being prom queen, she's like, I'm gonna do it for the money, basically for the scholarship, so she can go to university. I think she wants to be a doctor or in the medical field, so this is very important to her. And this is also a female-female relationship. She ends up having this romance with one of the other girls who is trying to be prom queen, and there wasn't really anything in this book that I would say was bad, but I did only give this one 3 stars. I just didn't love it, and I think it's because it is young adult, and I probably shouldn't have read it, but I did want to try something a bit different in the vlog. And this one, I feel like the romance wasn't the main focus of this book. There is a lot about her sibling relationship. So her brother has sickle cell anemia, so you're looking at like chronic illness, and it's a lot about Liz actually like finding her voice and standing for what she believes in, which I really do like. I think a lot of people would love this. If you loved young adult contemporary, I would definitely recommend it. It just wasn't like my favourite thing. And then the final book that I attempted was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and I didn't get any further than the first chapter in this one. There was an ableist joke in the first chapter and I just didn't want to continue. That was all I have to say. If you love this book, good for you. If you do think that I should give it a go and actually try and read more, then let me know, like if you really love this book and you think that it improves. But yeah, I kind of just like put this one down, and I think I burnt myself out from all the romance, and because I just thought I wasn't going to enjoy it anyway, I was like, let's just put it down. Then I read a book that I did really enjoy, and that was the Gilda Stories by Joelle Gomez. This is a vampire story, again, vampires, and this follows 2 women called Gilda, her. But the main character is this black woman. She has escaped slavery and she comes across this brothel, and the people at the top are vampires, and she ends up getting turned into a vampire. I don't think that's a spoiler. And then it's following her throughout her entire life as it goes through history. So it's like a collection of stories, like snapshots from her life. Yeah, so the last chapter is set in 2050. So you're starting from, like, I think it's the 1800s. Let's have a quick look. 1850. I was very intrigued as I was going through this book. I couldn't put it down, really. And I did love the take that it had on vampires. It felt very traditional, but also it had these like new takes. So I think, is it like telepathy? Mind control? That is a thing in this. I think this one could work for a lot of people. And yeah, I did really enjoy this one. It was very atmospheric as well. And because each of the chapters was quite separate, I think that maybe hindered my enjoyment a little bit because they felt very contained. Obviously, that's the point. I think there were just some sections that I wanted a bit more of. Like, I wanted to like go a bit deeper in those sections. And obviously each of the chapters I think is about like 30 pages, maybe a little bit longer, but you're only with certain characters for that tiny period of time. And because some of them have such like a long-lasting impact on our main character, it would have been nicer to be with them a little bit longer. But that's like a very minor criticism. So I gave this one 4 stars. I don't know if I said that. Then the final DNF I had is probably going to be like incredibly controversial, but I'm standing with what I have done because I DNF'd Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman. This was another one that I think I got maybe 1 or 2 chapters in, and there wasn't really anything wrong with the book. It was just, I was looking at myself and was like, do I really want to read this? Is this really a series that I'm going to enjoy? So I did read Scythe last year, and I think I gave it 3 stars. It was just an okay read for me. And I know that a lot of people say that Thunderhead is better than Scythe, but I just think it's the world itself that I don't like reading about. I really don't like dystopians. I don't know if other people do this, but you kind of insert yourself in the story and you're like, what would I do in that situation? I think that's probably a common thing, but I just get really stressed in dystopian worlds because I'm like, I can't deal with that. And it just causes me too much stress, and I don't think that's what this series is meant to do. So I was just like 2 chapters in and I was like, why am I reading this? I didn't love Scythe, and I just don't think I'm going to love this series. So I thought maybe it's just better to like pass it on to someone who will actually really enjoy these books. I know this video has been going a long time, but we are almost at the end, and the next book was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is a classic following this young handsome man called Dorian Gray who becomes a little bit obsessed about his beauty, and he ends up accidentally making this deal that this portrait would show all the age and ugliness of his character, but he would stay forever young and beautiful. And it's a lot about, is it aestheticism? Is that a thing? And it was very dark, very atmospheric. I really loved the writing style, and I would definitely recommend this for fans of the Gothic. It also felt very accessible if you maybe don't read too many classics. I felt like it was very understandable. There were some bits that went off, you know, on a bit of a tangent. My only criticism really was that maybe I wanted a bit more. I think that seems like a common theme, that I actually prefer longer books, because obviously there's a lot about Dorian and how like evil he becomes, but you only really see tiny snippets of that, and I think I wanted a tiny little bit more. But despite that, I still gave it 4 stars. I still really enjoyed this, and I definitely want to read some more from Oscar Wilde. And then the final book in this video, if you've stayed this long, thank you, I appreciate you. But the final book I'm going to talk about is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. So I haven't actually finished this one yet, but I've got a chunk through. I'm on page 460, and I've slowly been reading this over the first few months of the year. We're in March now. I'm continuing to read it. I'm hoping to finish it by June, but we shall see. And I thought that I would just give you a little update about my thoughts. I think at the moment it's kind of sitting at a 4-star read, but there are some aspects aspects of this that I absolutely adore. There was a whole passage about crime and punishment and the prison system, which I really enjoyed. Also, if you don't know what Les Mis is about, it's this epic, this French epic about the French Revolution. We haven't really got into that yet, but the main plot is you're following this convict called Jean Valjean, who has been in prison for 19 years, and then he gets out and he's on the run, he's trying to change his life and the stuff, lots of stuff. Yeah, so some parts I'm really enjoying. And the characters specifically, like, I love Jean Valjean. I think he's going to be one of my favourite characters of all time. He probably already is one of my favourite characters. I just really love him and the complexity and depth in his character. But Victor Hugo, he goes on about things that no one cares about for a very long time. I'm listening to this as an audiobook, and first of all, like, it's already like a 60-hour audiobook. I think I've listened to like 24 hours or something like that so far, and there's just like hours where you're listening to him talk about, like, what was it, Waterloo? Oh my gosh. Like, every single person in Waterloo, every single battle, like how the battle continued. That has nothing to do with the book. Why are you telling me about Waterloo? Like, that happens in the past. He just goes on about things that I don't care about, and he's like ruining it. Some of the bits in this, like, are definitely 5 stars. Like, I absolutely adore, like, the core story about Jean Valjean is absolutely incredible, but the issue is that Victor Hugo just goes on about other things, and I knew it was going to be like this. No one needs a book that long. But yeah, I am really enjoying this one, and I'm going to read a little bit more of it today. But yes, that is it. Those are all the books. That took a very long time. I hope that you have enjoyed watching this. What are your thoughts on any of the books that I've talked about? Even if you, like, love them, for example, if say you love the Kiss Quotient, I'd love to hear what you thought. But that is it for today's video. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and to everyone out there, stay curious. Bye!